This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 192, How to Stay Out of TLDR Hell. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you grow your tribe and your bottom line through insanely good content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is September 15th, 2016. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, this podcast is available on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and now Google Play Music. So if you like what you hear, please feel free to click on over and subscribe. Okay, I'm happy to report that I now have my voice back mostly. Had an opportunity on Sunday to go to the Texans game. That was the season opener against the Chicago Bears, and did quite a fair amount of hooting and hollering myself, but apparently it worked because we won. So back in form vocally today. Also, oh my gosh, my cup runneth over, guys. Not only has football returned, but my beloved South Park is back this week with, get this, season number 20. Season 20 of South Park starts this week. That is crazy. That means that kids who were born in 1996 or later do not know a world without South Park. How beautiful is that? I got to tell you. Also, some apologies. Someone pointed out to me that in the Back to School episode, which I believe was 2 episodes ago, I talked about growing your skills and your knowledge by listening to different podcasts, and I rattled off a few of my favorites, but I neglected to give you the contact information or to add links to the blog post for the episode. And I want to say thanks to listener Alicia for pointing that out. So the 3 podcasts that I mentioned were, number 1, the title of the podcast is Online Marketing and Communications Podcast, and the podcaster is John Buskall. Now, his first name is spelled Jon, and last name is Buscall. The second one I mentioned was the Duct Tape Marketing Podcast, not duck as in quack quack, but duct tape as in the stuff you get at Home Depot. Duct Tape Marketing Podcast, and the podcaster's name is John, spelled John. His last name is Jansch. Jantzsch. And the last one I mentioned, the name of the podcast is Accidental Creative, and the podcaster's name is Todd Henry. Just like it sounds, Todd Henry, two first names. Anyway, I will definitely add these links to the blog post for this episode, so you will be able to catch up with those podcasts and podcasters. Okay, one more item. My new book, The Content Marketing Coach, Everything You Need to Get in the Game and Win, is now available on Amazon in both book and Kindle format. Took a few days to get the Kindle uploaded, and then for some reason they were showing up on different pages. All that is ironed out. So to see what luminaries such as Joe Pulizzi, Jay Baer, and Jeff Hazlett thought about the book, and to snag your own copy, go to contentmarketingcoachbook.com, and there will be a link on that page to the Amazon page where you can place your order. Okay, in last week's episode, we talked about some trends to watch in 2017 in the content marketing universe, and these, of course, will be important to keep in mind as we plan our strategies for next year. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or Stitcher or via the RSS feed. Today we're talking about how to avoid the bane of many content creators' existence, and that is the dreaded TLDR, also known as Too Long Didn't Read. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Some news from Facebook kicking off this week's news feed, and they are announcing new features for a capability that had slipped under my radar. Facebook lets you cross-post videos to multiple pages. So if you have one video that you want to feature on several different pages, maybe your brand has a number of different pages, you can actually cross-post it, which means you only have to go through that uploading process once. So this week, Facebook has expanded this capability by allowing users, and quoting here, to cross-post videos between pages with different owners, including pages that are under different business managers. So this could be, this could be very useful. Like I said, if your brand has multiple pages or if there are multiple places where you want to cross-post your videos. It is currently available for regular pre-recorded videos and 360 videos, and will soon be available for videos that were previously live. So to enable this feature, what you do is you go to your page, click Settings, and I think that is I think that's a top right part of the page link, and then in the left column that appears on the setting page, there is an option that says cross-posting, and all you do is enter the page that you want to be able to cross-post with. That's to set it up. So interesting development out of Facebook. Okay, LinkedIn has rolled out what it is calling a new publisher experience. Quoting from the post, it involves a sleek, intuitive interface, more text and font options, and a beautiful new reading view that removes distractions and noise from the page. It's currently available to US users and will be rolled out worldwide very, very soon. So if you use LinkedIn Publisher, you may notice a different look, and that is the reason why it looks different. It's on purpose. Go figure. Also, news out of Twitter. Wow, so we've got all the big three covered in this week's news feed. Twitter is revamping its direct messages. It has announced enhancements to direct messages that include read receipts and web link previews. So previously, if you sent a direct message with a link, they would just see the text of that link. There would not be a preview. According to TechCrunch, this is their take on it, Twitter is trying to compete with other messaging platforms such as Facebook Messenger and Apple's iMessage. Now, I got to say, if Twitter is going to compete with those guys, they have got to do something about their spam problem. Guys, I don't even look at my direct messages anymore because all I see there is messages from people I just connected to saying, hey, thanks for connecting. Go download my ebook, or let's connect on Facebook, or here, you can buy a copy of my book. I mean, it's all promotional. It's all spam. I cannot remember the last time I actually got a meaningful message on direct messages. So I don't know how Twitter is going to do that, because like Facebook Messenger, you can only, for the most part, you can only message people you're connected to. There is something that they allow for brands, but on the whole, it's pretty closed. And then of course, Apple's iMessage, you can only, you can't iMessage just anybody. So I'm curious to see how Twitter progresses on its direct messages. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Voice got froggy. Okay, the content hit of the week is an interesting post called Why Content Marketing's Future Depends on Shorter Content and Less Content. This was written by Ronell Smith over at the Moz blog, and it caught my eye because it goes against a lot of the advice that we're seeing, where we're seeing that longer posts get more traffic, they get more shares. Google prefers long-form content. We're also seeing if you're not seeing results on your content, then you need to amp up your frequency and post more often. And this post by Ronell is a response to another post by Steve Rayson over on the BuzzSumo blog. And that post was called The Future is More Content. And he talks about how the Washington Post has ramped up its content creation to, believe it or not, 1,200 posts per day. So what Ronell does is he makes some very insightful counterpoints to Steve's arguments, and we're going to talk a little bit more about content length and frequency here in a bit. But I just wanted to point that out. It's not. Sometimes when we see best practices, we tend to take them as gospel, if you will, but it's also important to remember that there are two sides to every argument, and I think it's important to see both perspectives. Is the future of content very, very long posts, or is it very, very short posts and less frequency? There are arguments on both sides. Anyway, I thought it was a very interesting read, and I will provide a link in the blog post for this episode. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, I invite you to tweet it to me at Resonance CONT, Resonance Content with the ENT lopped off, so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, how to stay out of TLDR hell. This week I want to talk about avoiding one of the banes of any content creator's existence, and that is the acronym TLDR. And it means too long, didn't read. And you don't see it a whole lot anymore, but you may have seen it on Twitter. Like if someone tweets a link to someone saying, oh, this is a great post, I think you should read it. And if that person responds TLDR, it means it was too long and they didn't read it. I've heard some people also respond to emails that way, which is an interesting way to communicate that idea. So I wanted to talk about how to avoid TLDR. Now, big question here, does that mean all long content is bad? Does that mean our blog posts should not go over the 500, 600 word format that a lot of us fall into? And I don't think it does. I mean, if you're tackling a meaty topic and readers will benefit from a very thoughtful, in-depth explanation, then yes, a longer piece is best. And consequently, if you give short shrift to that topic, then your audience is going to feel shortchanged. However, we need to keep in mind that we're not creating college courses here. We're sharing information and insights on our blog. So I get that question from people a lot. How long should my blog posts be? I like to subscribe to what I call the miniskirt rule. Actually, it's not my rule. I got it elsewhere, but I like to quote it. It should be short enough to be interesting, but long enough to cover the basics. That is the miniskirt rule, and I think it applies very well to our content. So if you keep that in mind when you're creating your content, that's a good rule of thumb, and you may need to get some outside opinions on that. So with that, I want to share a few other tips for staying out of TLDR hell, some of the techniques that I've used that have helped me successfully create longer form content without boring or alienating the readers. The first tip that I want to share is I write once and I edit 3 times. So for your first draft, the first time you sit down to create that blog post or whatever it is you're creating, just let the words flow. Don't worry about structure. Don't worry about logical flow. Just get the ideas down. And that is not to be gross, but I call that the word barf. Just barf out those ideas however they come out and just get them down either on paper or on your screen, whatever your method is. And then, okay, so you get it out there. My first edit is for structure. So how are these ideas arranged? Is there a logical flow? Is there a logical introduction? Do I let the reader know what they're getting? And do I segue logically into my 3 points or 5 points or however it is? And is the way those ideas are arranged, does that make sense proceeding from one to the other? My second edit is for style. So I look at things like word choices, sentence structures. If I'm telling a story, is there any way I can tighten that up a little bit and still have it be effective? So the second edit is for style. And then the third edit is kind of the final cleanup, looking at spelling, grammar, if I've got any sentence fragments lying around, that's when I edit for those elements. So if you find that helpful, I invite you to give it a try, but try the write once, edit 3 times structure. The second piece of advice I have for you is stick to shorter words, shorter sentences, and short paragraphs. My rule of thumb is to keep it around a 7th grade reading level. And for our international audience, that would correlate to someone, maybe an 11 or a 12-year-old, something that would make sense to them. Now, some of my clients balk at that. They say, oh, well, we're writing for physicians or we're writing for oil and gas professionals. We're not writing for 7th graders. I realize that, but you have to consider the way we take in content online, and yes, most of our content is still online, we take it in very differently from the way we would take in like a paper, like a newspaper or a magazine. We tend to scan more. And when we're scanning, those shorter words, shorter sentences, and shorter paragraphs convey very well in that style of taking in content. Excuse me. So when you read over your content in your second or third edit, if you follow that structure, think about whether that would make sense to an 11 or a 12-year-old. And if not, if you've got a lot of big words in there, if you've got some long, drawn-out sentences, look at simplifying those a bit. And there are actually apps out there that will assign a grade level to your content. You paste in your content and it says, okay, this corresponds to 7th grade or 8th grade or 24th grade. I had that happen to me once. It's like, well, okay, whoa, I don't know what 24th grade is, but clearly I need to simplify here. But simplify, and that will help keep your readers engaged and keep them from getting bored or distracted when taking in that longer content. Here's a fun exercise that you might want to try. Think about this. If you were being charged $1 for every word in the piece, how would that affect your writing? Now, we wouldn't necessarily write less, but what we would do is make sure that every single word has a justification for being there. So we can go through word by word. Does this word need to be there? Does this word need to be there? And it kind of drive you crazy if you do it for very long periods at a time. But that is how diligent we need to be in cutting through the fluff, cutting through the extraneous detail, and distilling down your content to its true essence. And that is going to keep that experience tight for your reader. It's going to tighten up that experience and it's going to help keep them engaged when you are cutting out the excess that doesn't really need to be there, and not necessarily something that has to be there in an informative way. If you want to tell a story that creates a more personal experience, like if you explain a concept and then want to tell a story about it, that story's not extraneous. That story is putting the person in a situation and telling them about a place and time when this point was salient. So, but it has to be, again, it has to serve a purpose. And that story would serve the purpose of making the concept a little more real for the reader. So think about that $1 a word exercise the next time you're looking at a piece of content. Another tip I have to share is break it up. So if you have long paragraph after long paragraph after long paragraph, that is going to exhaust your reader, and they're probably not going to continue. It just wears them out, and it exhausts them and makes it more likely they're going to be distracted. So break up your text. Break it up with subheadings, with call-outs, with bullet lists, and make sure also that from a design perspective, you have plenty of white space. If you're covering the whole territory from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, work with your designers to maybe condense that a little bit and make it a little more, give a little more white space on either side of the content. And there is a design term for that. I cannot think of it right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Make sure there's plenty of white space on the page, because that gives your reader some breathing room. They don't feel, if they're confronted with a page of pure solid text, sometimes they feel suffocated. And the white space adds some breathability to your content. Tip number, what is this? Tip number 5, maybe? I didn't number these bullets, but we'll call it number 5. Get visual. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that tends to hold true today. So if you can express some of ideas, or maybe reinforce some of those ideas through images, through presentations, through infographics, through videos, then you will accomplish 2 things. Number 1, you will give readers a break from all that reading, and you will also tap into the power of visual content. And we've talked about that. We tend to understand things more quickly when we see them presented visually. We also tend to retain that information and remember it longer when we see it presented visually. So think about how you can introduce visual elements to shake up that reading experience a bit and to give your ideas a visual presence, which will make them more likely to be understood and retained and remembered. Tip number 6, sum it up. So if you are writing a long post, you might want to close it with a recap of the main points. And this is almost like after your readers have had a nice meal, giving them a little go-to box to take with them, a little doggy bag, if you will. to sum up, hey, here are the points that I made here. Here are the points that you might want to take with you. That's a very easy add to any longer post. And then finally, one of the trends that we talked about a couple of weeks ago is serializing your content. And I don't mean C-E-R-E-A-L like your Cocoa Puffs that you ate this morning. I'm talking S-E-R-I-A-L. So as you write a post, especially if it starts to go on longer, you may discover that the topic actually demands more than one post. So feel free to do that. Feel free to turn that one post into a series rather than trying to cram it all into one big, giant, monster, ginormous blog post. You might want to turn that into a series. And the great thing about series is that if people see a part 1, well, they're going to be curious. Well, what's going to be in part 2? What's going to be in part 3? Or if they come in the middle at part 2, they're going to want to go back and read part 1 and stay tuned for part 3. So serializing your content is a great opportunity to engage those readers and to keep them coming back. And of course, to keep from overloading them by trying to cram everything into a single post. So short and sweet, those are my insights for staying out of TLDR hell. If you have any questions or want to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And the best way to reach me is actually through the website, resonancecontent.com, or you can also tweet me at @RachParker. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. Last week, I was doing kind of an informal consult. I was meeting a new connection for coffee, and she asked one question that I get asked a whole lot, and that is, can I share the same content on my blog and in my e-newsletters? And my short answer is no. My longer answer is no, but. So let me explain what I mean by that. Should you copy and paste entire articles from your blog into your e-newsletter or vice versa? No. Reason number 1 why you don't want to do that is if you're sharing the same content in both places, people have no incentive to follow you in both places. If they know that your that your e-newsletters contain the same information as you have on your blog, there's no incentive to read your blog. And conversely, if they're subscribing to your blog, then they have no reason to subscribe to your e-newsletter. So by varying those a bit, you give people incentive to follow you on both venues. Reason number 2 is they are two very different venues with different requirements. I would say a typical blog post is way too long for an e-newsletter. When you're talking about e-newsletters, you're talking about much shorter attention spans. You're talking about fingers poised over the delete key. And you're also talking about an inbox that is jam-packed with topics relevant and irrelevant. So our e-newsletters need to be right and tight, and then for the blog we can get a little bit more in depth. So the solution that I propose is use each to cross-promote the other. So when you put out your e-newsletter, as I do in my e-newsletter every Friday, I share the links to the latest blog posts so that if people like what they read, and the newsletter content is self-contained, people can take it in right there in itself. And then if they want to learn more, they can also check out the blog and, of course, the latest podcast episode. Conversely, we want to make sure that our blog readers know about our emails, and we want to make it easy for them to subscribe. And we want to make it blatantly obvious that, hey, if you enjoyed this content, then I invite you to subscribe to my e-newsletter. That way, you will get maximum bang from your buck, or your euro or your peso or whatever your currency is. You will be getting the greatest benefit out of both your e-newsletter and your blog. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play Music or our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. Also, remember that my new book, The Content Marketing Coach, Everything You Need to Get in the Game and Win, is now available in book and Kindle format on Amazon. To learn more about the book and to snag your copy, copy, visit contentmarketingcoachbook.com. Also want to mention, I kind of dropped out of sight when I was working on the book, but now that it is done and published, I'm going to be hitting the speaking circuit very intensely in 2017. And I've actually got some speaking gigs booked up for the rest of this year. So if you know of a favorite conference, either a dedicated marketing conference or an industry conference that has a marketing track to it, I would love to hear about those. So if you would tweet those to me at, you can tweet them to my personal at Rach Parker. I would love to hear about those. Okay, as always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from Napoleon Hill. He once said, quote, "Effort only fully releases its reward after a person refuses to quit," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.